One short disclaimer. Some of the numbers you will see in the visuals of this video are wrong. This only applies to the visuals, so if I say a number, it is correct, but if you only see a number and I don't mention it, it is maybe wrong and just there to be an example of how something works. Helldivers 2 has a bunch of invisible systems that keep the game running, but are hidden to the players. These are helpful to know about, but not necessary to enjoy the game. However, as a game designer myself, I'm interested in how games work, so today we are going to have a look at some of these systems. Starting with this information comes from a Reddit post by Gogson. Planets are connected by supply lines that are invisible in the game. You can see them on the website helldivers.io. These supply lines dictate what planets can be liberated by Helldivers and which planets can be attacked by automatons. Bug attacks don't necessarily follow the supply lines, instead they just seem to occur around other bug planets. To be able to liberate a planet, it must be connected to a super Earth controlled planet via a supply line. The automatons can also only attack planets that are connected to other automaton-controlled planets, which will start a defense campaign on the attacked planet. If the bugs attack a planet, this immediately cuts off all planets that were previously accessible via supply lines from this planet. When bots attack a planet, the access is only lost when the defense campaign fails. When access to a planet is lost due to a defense campaign on another planet failing, which interrupts the supply line, you can't play on that planet anymore, and all the progress made in its liberation is slowly reduced until it reaches zero. This is why the, at the time of writing, current major order is harder than some of the previous ones. Both planets that are part of the major order were cut off from the supply lines at the time where the major order was received, which means before the planets that the major order requires to be liberated can even begin to be liberated, multiple other planets have to be liberated first. Speaking of liberation, how does liberation work? Each planet has a HP value. For liberation campaigns it is 1 million, and for defend campaigns it varies between 600k and 2 million. The goal is to reduce the HP to 0. So when in the following I am saying dealing damage to a planet, that is something good, that is not something negative. When the HP reaches 0, the planet is either liberated or defended. Every completed operation deals damage to the planet. Abandoning an operation does not heal the planet, so it is not negative. For liberation campaigns, the planet also regenerates HP slowly. Again, this is something bad. This regeneration is felt strongest when it is night in America, since Americans make up the majority of the player base, and when that majority sleeps, the bots and bugs don't. This is also the reason why here in EU a planet is often liberated overnight, since the Americans liberated it while we were sleeping. Also, the bots have the option of nuking a planet, leading to an immediate drop in liberation progress of multiple %. After all this mostly simple information, let's start with the main part of the video and talk about all of this information is taken from a Reddit post by Georgie Nation, who tested it together with 2 other users. All relevant links are in the description. If this interests you, I encourage you to read the original post for more details. Also, this is only about patrols. This is not about enemies that spawn around objectives, or enemies that spawn from bug nests or bot fabricators, or enemies that spawn from bug breaches or bot drops. But also, patrols are the most dangerous group of these that you have to look out for constantly, so this will still be helpful. If you play the game, you have most likely noticed enemy patrols scouring the map. These are mostly a small group of enemies that cross paths with the player and can call bug breaches or bot drops. The way these patrols spawn is really interesting, and knowing about it can actually help make your missions easier. So let's learn about them by answering some questions, starting with: what enemies make up a patrol? This is mostly random. There are some predefined templates that make up a patrol. One template may be 8 hunters, or 5 scavengers, or 3 bile spitters. Then, when a patrol spawns, one of these predefined templates is chosen at random. These are defined by the developers. Patrols spawn at a random point on the map and walk towards a different point. These points are chosen so that the route they walk overlap with the player position at the time when the patrol spawns. Also, at the moment there's a bug that bot patrols sometimes get stuck in the middle of the map. That can mean that you encounter less patrols during a mission because all the patrols just stand there in the middle of the map. This is the most important and interesting question to answer. Let's imagine a player as a bucket. This bucket is constantly being filled with drops of water by the server, and when the bucket is full, it is completely emptied and a patrol spawns. The amount of drops this bucket can hold is determined by the amount of players and the difficulty, with more players and a higher difficulty reducing the amount of drops needed to fill the bucket, thus increasing the spawn rate of patrols. Also, for Terminite missions, the bucket is smaller by default, meaning if everything else is the same, there will be more Terminite patrols than Automaton. Let's imagine a lone player started a mission on challenging difficulty fighting automatons. For this specific player, the bucket would fill every 240 seconds, meaning one patrol spawns every 240 seconds. Additionally, there are a few factors that also decrease the capacity of the bucket. The most important being the completion of the main mission of the map, the mission with the orange icons. Completing this mission leads to the capacity of the bucket being cut down to almost a quarter of the previous value, meaning patrols will almost spawn 4 times as often. Destroying enemy outposts also makes our bucket smaller, but only after 50% of them have been destroyed. So if you have 8 outposts on a map, destroying 4 of them will change nothing, but destroying the remaining 4 will decrease the bucket capacity by about 17%. Enemy outposts, everything relating to the main objective, secondary objectives, and the extraction point have an area of influence on the map. Being inside this area generates a hidden stat we will call heat. Heat generation is at its highest when the player is within 50 meters or less of the thing generating the area of influence. After that, it drops off by 1% per meter, reaching 0% at 150 meters. If a player is within 2 or more areas of influence at the same time, the heat generation will not stack, and the area of influence with the highest heat generation is chosen. The heat generation stops if the enemy outpost is destroyed, or for objectives when either the objective is completed or its static spawns, meaning the enemies standing around the objective are killed. The heat generation of the extraction point will never stop. But what does heat do? When heat generation is at 100%, it will increase the amount of drops put in the bucket by 50%. Meaning, if the time between spawns was 100 seconds before, it will now go down to 66.6 seconds. Small side note, for some side objectives like stratagem jammers or detector towers, the heat is generated by the fabricators, not by the objective. Meaning destroying the fabricator stops most of the heat generation, but destroying the objective and not the fabricators doesn't. But the objective amplifies the heat generation, increasing the amount of drops dropped in the bucket by another 10%. All this just to say, destroy the fabricators first. Another really important factor is players splitting up, because every group of players has its own bucket. A group are multiple players within a distance of 75 meters or less between each other. Meaning, if the distance between players is more than 75 meters, every player gets their own bucket that fills up independently and is affected by all the stuff mentioned before. Important to mention is that to count as a group, you don't all have to be within 75 meters of each other. If player A is 50 meters from player B and 50 meters from player C, but player A and C are 100 meters apart, it will still count as a group. Meaning if 4 players split up in 4 groups, there will be effectively 4 times as many patrols on the map as before. But remember, these spawn at random points on the map, meaning one player can be attacked by 4 times as many patrols, while the others don't have to deal with any of them. The only place that patrols can't spawn is within a 75 meter radius of the player or group whose bucket failed to spawn this patrol. Other players or groups, however, are not protected from patrols triggered by another group. Meaning if there are two groups, the patrol from Group A can spawn directly on top of Group B, but not directly on top of Group A. One short update. While I'm editing this video, a patch was released that tries to fix this so that patrols can no longer spawn on top of the player. The patch notes only say reduced incidence of that happening, so it's probably not entirely fixed, but it should happen less frequently that a patrol will spawn directly on top of a player. Okay, back to the video. All this means that splitting up can have a huge impact on the amount of patrols spawning. Another small factor is respawning. While dying has no effect on anything, reinforcing has. But it doesn't reduce the bucket by some multiplier, but instead dumps a bunch of drops into it at once. This means that when a player is reinforced, the next patrol will spawn way faster, but it has no effect on any patrol after that. The exact amount of drops is random. Let's go through an example of all this. Let's say a group of 3 fights bugs on difficulty 6. For terminates on difficulty 6, the baseline for the bucket capacity is 136 seconds. Since there are 3 players, this baseline is reduced by 25%. So at the start of the mission, one patrol will spawn every 102 seconds. Completing the main objective will knock that down to 28 seconds. Destroying all outposts instead of the main objective will only reduce the capacity to about 87 seconds. If you're at maximum heat, this will be reduced by 1/3, knocking it down to about 57 seconds. Now for a worst case scenario. 4 players play a mission against bugs on Helldive. The baseline for this is 99 seconds. The multiplier for 4 players is not known, but should be around 0.67, already reducing the time between patrols to 66 seconds. When they now complete the main mission, this time is again reduced to 18 seconds. Destroying all outposts will further reduce it to 15. If this group now tries to extract, heat generation will be at maximum, reducing the time between patrol spawns to 10 seconds. Also, if a member of the group is reinforced, the next patrol will almost spawn immediately. After all that, now for a short TLDR. Fighting terminates over bots. More players, harder difficulty, main objective completions, outpost clearing, being close to an important thing on the map, and splitting up will drastically increase the amount of patrols spawning. The most drastic is completing the main objective, so that should always be the last thing you do on a mission. There are also a few things that don't have an effect on patrol spawning, despite some might thinking that they would have. Those are engaging in combat, stretch gyms used, the planet, the mission type as long as it's a regular 40-minute mission, points of interest, interacting with stuff like terminals or loading the artillery or turning a radar dish, completion of secondary objectives, although it should be noted that completing them removes their area of influence from the map. Bug breaches and bot drops also don't really have an effect, although they can in some cases slightly delay the next patrol spawn, but that is both rare and minor, so I won't go further into it. And most importantly, time spent in the mission. Yes, the timer in the top right has absolutely zero effect on the amount of patrol spawns, despite there being a tip in the loading screen directly stating the opposite. One last thing. With the new Warbond Cutting Edge, a new booster called Localized Confusion was added. This has no impact on patrols, however it increases the time after a bot drop or bug breach before another one can be called. So with all this information, you should be ready to tackle your next mission and the Galactic War in general. Good luck out there, Helldivers.